It started on a Wednesday, just as the lilacs were blooming. That early part of spring when the air still has a little bite to it, like it hasn't fully woken up from winter. Her house sat at the end of a quiet street, tucked between two maples that whispered all night long when the wind caught them right. And maybe that was the first thing. Maybe the wind knew something she didn't. The clock said 3:04 a.m., the kind of time that feels neither here nor there. She blinked into the dark, not really afraid, just awake. As if something had nudged her, softly but firmly, like a child needing a glass of water. She thought maybe it was just a one-time thing. But the next night, and the next, always 3:04. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. So before you get too comfortable, maybe take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you honestly like what I do here. I really love hearing where people are watching from, or where they're trying to fall asleep. I read every one of those comments in the quiet hours when stories feel closest to the skin. Anyway, she tried everything that seemed reasonable. A cup of warm chamomile with honey, the kind in a soft ceramic mug that fits your hands just right. Magnesium powder stirred into oat milk, gently fizzing as it dissolved. A lavender spray on the pillow. The whole bedtime playlist of calm, but still like a quiet ritual carved into time. 3:04. She began checking the digital clock out of habit. The green glow started to feel like a companion. Some nights, she'd just lie there, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the wood beams in the ceiling. Other nights, she'd sit up and write. Just little things, a sentence or two. I woke up again. Felt like something was missing. Dream was fading, couldn't catch it. The handwriting sloped more and more each time, as if her body was tired, but her mind hadn't been given permission. And it wasn't that her life was stressful, at least not in the usual way. She worked from home, editing quiet documentaries for museums and nonprofit groups. Her days were spent in soft focus, ambient music in the background, long walks around the neighborhood, a cat who slept more than she did. People assumed she was well rested, balanced, and for the most part, she was. Except for that hour, she didn't talk about it, not really. People say all sorts of things about sleep. You have to avoid screens, you need a darker room, you should stop eating at 6 p.m. She'd tried most of it. But this wasn't about falling asleep. It was about what came after. Sometimes she wondered if it was hormonal, like maybe her melatonin just gave up halfway through the night. Or maybe her cortisol clock was off, peaking too early. She'd heard someone say once that the liver wakes around 3 a.m., and she thought about that too. Like maybe her body was trying to process something deeper than food. But what? One night, about 2 weeks in, she had a dream. It was soft and strange and almost colorless. She was in a cabin, old, wooden, full of moths and the scent of pine. There was a fire crackling, and someone, a man, standing by the window, facing away. She didn't recognize him, but she felt something stir in her chest when she saw the back of his neck, like memory, like grief. She woke again at 3:04, and this time her pillow was damp. The next morning, she didn't say much, made her usual tea, opened the windows, let the breeze carry in the scent of wet bark and lilacs. But something had shifted. She sat at her little kitchen table and began to write, not in a sleepy daze like before, but with clarity. She wrote about the cabin, about how the light felt in the dream, about the man's shoulders, and the sound the fire made. She realized she had been to that cabin once, years ago. Vermont, late October. There was someone, Adam. She hadn't thought of him in almost a decade. They hadn't ended badly, not really. Just drifted apart the way people do when life demands more than love can give. But that weekend, the one in the cabin, it had rained all night. And on the last morning, she'd made oatmeal with too much cinnamon. And he had told her something about how she made everything feel quieter. She hadn't known what to say. So she smiled. And the moment passed. Later that day, they'd left. She never saw the cabin again, or Adam. And now, years later, her body was waking her up at the exact same time she'd slipped into sleep that final night, wrapped in flannel sheets, his breath at her neck. It was 3:04 when she last looked at the clock in that cabin. She remembered that now. It wasn't insomnia, it was memory. The kind that curls under the surface, waiting for stillness. She told her friend about it, just the part about the dreams. Her friend, a soft-spoken yoga teacher who always smelled faintly of orange blossoms, suggested something small. Try tracking what's around you before bed, she said. Not just what you do, what you feel, what you smell, what you remember. So she did. She started with the basics. Peppermint soap, soft fleece pajamas, the exact herbal tea blend, lemon balm, rose, chamomile, passion flower. But then, something odd happened. She noticed that every time she used the pine-scented hand lotion she kept in her bedside drawer, a gift from years ago, barely touched. The dreams returned. Not just the cabin, other places too. The bridge in Portland, the bakery in Halifax, all tethered to people, to moments that had long since faded. She wondered, could scent trigger time? She asked herself gently, not as an analyst, but as someone curious about her own soft machinery. One night, just to see, she didn't drink tea, didn't spray lavender. She just sat on the couch with a blanket and listened to the wind in the maples, journaled a little, read a paragraph from an old book. Then, without setting an alarm or checking the clock, she lay down, and when her eyes opened, the room was bright with morning. The clock said 6:43. She sat there for a long time, listening. No fridge hum, no creaking beams, no heavy heart, just birdsong and the scent of lilacs through the open window. But that wasn't the end. Some nights, she still woke up at 3:04. Not as often, not as sharply. But when she did, it didn't scare her anymore. She'd place a hand over her heart, breathe in slowly, say thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the part of her that remembered so she could begin to let go. It wasn't about fixing sleep, it was about listening to it. And in that hour between night and morning, she started hearing her life again. She began to notice how different the world looked at 3 a.m. when you weren't afraid of it. The shadows weren't menacing. They were gentle, long, like stories not yet told. The house didn't creak from loneliness. It breathed softly. Like her, even the air had a different weight, cooler, more deliberate, like the sky was holding its breath with her. By then, the 3:04 hour had become something of a ritual, not every night, but often enough that she stopped resisting it. She didn't reach for her phone anymore, didn't scroll or search for solutions. Instead, she reached for her robe, and sometimes she lit a candle, the beeswax kind, in the little glass jar that gave off that faint honey smell. She'd sit on the couch and just be, That's when the memories started to come without prompting. Not just the cabin, not just Adam, but smaller things. A late train in Florence where she shared a sandwich with a stranger. A motel in Wyoming where she cried in the bath after her mother's surgery. A white dog she used to walk when she lived above a deli. These weren't dreams. They were real, tactile, full of scent and texture. The kind of memories you don't know you've kept until your body unlocks the drawer. She once read that our bodies hold memory differently than the mind. That trauma and tenderness can settle in the fascia, in the breath, in the still hours when everything else quiets down. She didn't know if it was true, but it felt true. And these quiet wake-ups didn't feel like intrusions anymore. They felt like visitations. There was something sacred about that. So she started keeping a different kind of journal. Not the kind where you write what happened in your day. More like a what rose up kind of book. 1 page per night. Just feelings, flashes, phrases. Sometimes whole sentences. Sometimes just a word. Pine. Longing. Orange peel. And over time it became clear. Her body was healing. It just had its own way of doing it. She still had her bedtime comforts, of course. A new mug, clay, handmade, cool to the touch. A sleepy playlist full of cello and rainfall. A small tin of valerian and lemon balm lozenges, taken not out of desperation, but habit, a kindness to herself. She started calling them her quiet hour charms. There was a softness in letting go of control. A kind of rest in not fixing everything. And then, one night, the dreams came back. Not vivid this time, more like impressions, like watching rain slide down a window. There was the sound of water and the hush of snowfall and a voice, distant but familiar, saying, "You can come back whenever you're ready." She woke again, 3:04, this time with her hand on her chest. She didn't get up, didn't journal, just stayed there, looking up at the ceiling in the dark and whispered, "Okay." Something about saying it out loud felt different, like she'd made a quiet kind of promise. The next day, she dug through a closet she hadn't opened in years. Inside were old postcards, a scarf that still smelled like autumn leaves, a photo from that weekend in Vermont. She almost didn't recognize herself. Her hair was shorter, her smile was shy, but her eyes looked just like now. Like she was always watching for something soft to return. And she thought, maybe that's all the body wants, a safe place to return. It was around this time that she did something she hadn't done in over a year. She made a call, not to Adam. That part of her story had settled like snow after a long storm, but to her sister, the one she hadn't spoken to since the Christmas before last. After a misunderstanding, neither one of them had known how to untangle. It wasn't a dramatic call, just a quiet one. "Hey," she said, "I woke up thinking of you." There was a long silence on the other end, and then a laugh, and then a cry. It's strange how healing sometimes looks like waking up at 3 a.m. for 3 weeks straight until your body finds the nerve to say, "Now." She didn't tell her sister everything, not about the dreams, not about the candlelight journaling, but they talked, really talked, for the first time in months, about small things, soup recipes, the new grocery store near her place, a pair of slippers she wanted to send, and when she hung up, she felt lighter. Not because anything was fixed, but because she had spoken from the quiet place, the place that knew. And that night, she didn't wake at 3:04. She dreamed instead of lilacs and bees and someone humming in the kitchen. Still, some nights the wake-ups returned, but they had changed. They felt less like interruptions and more like check-ins. "How's your heart tonight?" they seemed to ask. "Is there anything left to feel?" She welcomed them those nights, lit the candle, drank warm oat milk with cinnamon and cardamom, read a poem or two, sat on the floor in her big old sweater and stared out the window at the soft curve of the moon. And sometimes she cried, not from sadness, from release, the kind of quiet, earned cry that only comes when you feel deeply safe. And her sleep, well, it returned in its own rhythm. Not perfect, not every night, but often and gently. It was like her body had needed to remember why it was safe to rest, that the world wouldn't fall apart if she closed her eyes, that not all wakefulness was a threat, that sometimes we wake up to find something, not because something is wrong, but because something finally has space to be felt. So she let the 3 a.m. hour be what it was. Not an enemy, not a curse, but a doorway, a whisper, a long-lost friend. The moon was waxing again. She could tell without looking at a calendar. There was a glow in the hallway that always returned when the moon grew full, casting soft shapes against the wooden floor, like memory in motion. It made the house feel not empty, but held, like something was keeping her company, quietly, just beyond the edge of sleep. That week, she found herself walking more in the evenings. No headphones, no goal, just a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck and the sound of her boots on the sidewalk. There was something about the way the air smelled at dusk that made her feel safe. Like the world was exhaling. Windows lit up slowly on the street, yellow, warm, flickering. Other people getting ready to wind down. It reminded her she wasn't alone. Sleep had become softer, not perfect, not always long, but when it came, it felt earned, like her body trusted her again. On the nights she did wake, sometimes at 3:04, sometimes not, she didn't tense. She let it happen, turned over, listened. The hum of the heater, the shuffle of the cat on the bed, the distant bark of a dog down the block. Familiar sounds, anchoring ones. One night, she dreamed of water. She was sitting by a lake, a place she didn't recognize but somehow knew. The air smelled like cedar and something floral, maybe jasmine. In the dream, she was just sitting, no one else around, just the sound of small waves touching the shore, over and over, like a lullaby spoken in a language older than words. When she woke, it was 3:06, close, but not exact. She smiled. That morning, she wrote in her journal, "I think I'm remembering how to rest." There was a time, not long ago, when she would have searched for the science behind it all. Circadian rhythms, cortisol curves, REM cycles. But now, she let those things drift to the edges. She believed in them, sure, but she no longer needed to hold them like shields. Sleep was no longer a problem to solve. It was a relationship to rebuild. And like any relationship, it needed patience, trust, time. She began to change little things gently, not out of fear, but as an offering. She unplugged the harsh blue lamp in her bedroom and replaced it with a soft amber one. She bought new bed sheets, nothing fancy, just a pale moss green that reminded her of spring. She started brushing her hair before bed, slowly, like her grandmother used to. Not because it needed brushing, but because the motion was comforting. She even started whispering thank you, not every night, but often, before closing her eyes. Thank you, body, for carrying me. Thank you, night, for holding me. Thank you, sleep, for visiting, even if only for a while. And then something unexpected happened. Her friend, the one who had suggested the journal, asked her to help teach a little community workshop on rest. Not sleep, just rest. A few women gathering once a week in a warm studio that smelled like cedarwood and chamomile, bringing their own stories of wide-eyed nights and racing thoughts. They sat in a circle, sharing tea, stories, and silence. At first, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't a sleep expert. She hadn't cured anything. But the others didn't need a cure. They needed to feel less alone. So she told them about the hour between night and morning, about the dreams, about the man in the cabin whose name no longer haunted her, about the journal full of smells and phrases and single words. They listened. Some cried. Some laughed softly, in that way people do when they realize they've been carrying the same secret. One woman said, "I thought I was broken, but maybe I was just listening too early." That stayed with her because it was true. Sometimes the body hears the quiet before the mind is ready. Sometimes we wake not because we're anxious, but because some old part of us finally feels safe enough to speak. She still lit candles some nights, still made tea, still reached for magnesium when her legs felt restless, or put a drop of lavender oil on her wrist when the world outside felt too loud. But these weren't crutches, they were kindnesses, reminders that she could meet the night with gentleness. And eventually, she began to forget the clock. Not completely. But there were more mornings where she opened her eyes to sunlight instead of darkness. More days where she didn't think about sleep at all. And yet, she never resented the nights that woke her. They had taught her something about grief, about memory, about the body's strange and sacred way of remembering what the mind forgets. She found herself talking to the dark sometimes, not out loud, just inside. Like it was a companion, and in a way it was, because it had stayed with her when everything else seemed uncertain. It had asked nothing of her except attention, and when she gave it that, not out of fear, but love, the dark softened. The house became a home again, and her nights became places of rest, not riddles. She didn't keep track of how many times she woke anymore. She only kept track of how many times she felt peace when she did. It was late October again, nearly a year since that first 304. The trees had turned, deep russet and gold, and the air held that hush that only autumn carries. A kind of reverence, like the earth is bowing quietly before winter. She'd taken to sleeping with the window cracked just slightly, enough to let in the cool, dry breath of the season. Enough to remind her that life was still moving. That night, she woke, but not from fear. She opened her eyes slowly, instinctively turning her head toward the clock, and then stopped herself. She didn't want to know the time. It didn't matter anymore. Instead, she just lay there, the blanket tucked under her chin, the cat curled into the space behind her knees, and the wind outside murmuring through the maple leaves like an old lullaby. It was the kind of moment she never would have noticed before. Too quiet, too still, too subtle. But now it felt like a gift. She didn't get up. She didn't journal. She simply breathed. And after a while, without effort, she fell back asleep. In the morning, she remembered something odd, a feeling, not a dream. The sense that someone had been sitting at the edge of her bed, not watching, just being, like a presence made of comfort. She thought maybe it was her grandmother, or maybe some version of herself, younger or older or somewhere in between. Someone who'd come to say, "You don't have to carry so much anymore." She believed in that kind of thing now. Not ghosts, but presence. Imprints, the way love can linger in a room long after the people are gone. The way the body knows before the mind understands. That week, she drove out to the mountains. Just for a few days. A little cabin, not the same one as before, but similar in feeling. Wood smoke, pine needles underfoot, a lake that caught the light just right in the early morning. She brought only one bag, a sweater, a notebook, a thermos of tea. She didn't go to escape anything. She went to return to herself. On the second night, she woke again. This time, to the sound of rain on the roof. Soft, persistent, rhythmic. She sat up, pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and padded to the window. Outside, the trees swayed in the dark, and the lake shimmered in the moonlight, silver and still. There was no clock in the cabin, just a quietness that felt sacred. She made tea, chamomile with a hint of fennel, and sat by the fireplace. And there, in that silence, she remembered the phone call she never made, the one to Adam. Years ago, after the cabin, after the drifting, she had drafted it in her head so many times, but never dialed. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know what to say. And then time passed, as it does, and the moment was gone. But now, sitting by the fire, she didn't feel regret. She felt grace. She realized that not every story needs an ending to be complete. Some just need to be honored, felt, held. She whispered, "Thank you," into the stillness. Not to him specifically, but to the moment, the memory, the version of herself who loved and let go. It felt like laying something down, not burying it, just setting it gently on the earth, where it could rest too. She stayed in the cabin 3 more nights. Woke once at dawn to deer outside the window. Woke once to a dream about her father's old coat. Woke once and didn't remember why. But each time she felt calm, present, whole. When she returned home, she brought a small pine cone from the cabin. Not as a souvenir, but as a reminder. That rest can happen anywhere. That healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just sleeping through the night and waking with a quiet heart. She placed the pine cone on her nightstand, next to her journal, next to the little tin of valerian mints she no longer reached for, but still kept close, like an old friend. And that night, she slept. Not as someone who was trying to sleep, but as someone who trusted rest would come. That winter, the nights grew long and blue. Not dark exactly, more like softly dimmed, the way an old theater looks before the curtain rises. There was a stillness in everything, in the way the snow fell, in the way the days ended early, in the hush between one breath and the next. She found herself going to bed earlier, not out of exhaustion, but invitation. Like the night had become a place she wanted to go, not something she had to pass through. Her routines were quiet now. She didn't call them routines anymore, actually. They were just rhythms. A slow bath with Epsom salt and a few drops of bergamot. A few pages from a book she'd already read twice. A single candle, always the same one. Soft amber glass, warm scent of sandalwood and rose, and sometimes a cup of warm oat milk with a pinch of nutmeg. It was never about doing things perfectly. It was about being gentle with herself, with time, with the parts of her that once only stirred at 3:04 a.m. Some evenings, she'd journal, not because she needed to process anything urgent, but because it felt good to see her thoughts laid out like threads she could trace. She started noticing how her handwriting had softened over the year. Less tight, less hurried, looser, kinder. As if her hand had finally exhaled. One entry read, "I don't measure sleep in hours anymore. I measure it in peace." She smiled when she read that back weeks later, because it was true. Sleep still wasn't perfect. Some nights she'd stir, briefly, gently, in the small hours. But now it felt like being touched by a passing breeze, a reminder that her body was still here, still listening, still part of the world. She no longer checked the time. That habit had faded, as had the urgency. Instead, she'd reach for her pillow, turn to her side, and whisper something she didn't even realize had become her lullaby. "I'm okay. It's okay. You can rest now." And almost always, she would. One morning, she woke up, and the sun was already high. The cat was sprawled at the foot of the bed like a tiny lion in repose. The world outside glowed with fresh snow, so white it almost shimmered. She lay there a while, letting her eyes adjust. No rush, no list of things to solve. Just morning. She sat up slowly, pressing her feet to the floor, and for the first time in a long time, she thought, "I'm rested, not just from sleep, but from all the years she'd carried the weight of trying so hard to make her body behave." She didn't need to fight anymore. She didn't need to decode the mystery of 304. She had already answered it in her own quiet way. Not with a fix, not with a formula, but with listening and kindness and a willingness to sit in the dark without fear. That's the thing about healing. It rarely arrives all at once. It sneaks in through the smallest cracks. A cup of tea, a softer light, a conversation you were brave enough to start, a pine cone on your nightstand reminding you of a cabin that once held your sorrow with grace. She never forgot the way it felt that first night, that sudden wake-up, the way her heart had fluttered like a moth, the not knowing, the search. But now, looking back, she didn't see it as a problem. She saw it as a turning, a signal that something inside her had shifted, that she was ready to feel what she'd once tucked away, ready to forgive what couldn't be rewritten, ready to rest. And so she did. Night after night, season after season, with softness, with care, with the full understanding that the body speaks in quiet rhythms, and that sleep isn't just about closing your eyes. It's about opening your heart, letting the night be what it is, a place to return, a place to breathe, a place to begin again. Thank you for spending this quiet little moment with me. If this story made you feel seen, or simply helped you rest tonight, I'm truly grateful you were here. Sleep well, wherever you are.